On a Friday afternoon in July 1982, the air inside Sun Valley Market felt thick with freezer breath and sunburnt asphalt, the kind of ordinary American heat that made everything. Customers, carts, tempers move a half step slower. Lane 3 was Janice Carter's lane, the one beneath the flickering 12 items or less sign that never seemed to scare anyone away. Her hands already knew the rhythm. Slide, beep, bucket, smile, make change, repeat. It was muscle memory, not curiosity. That made her notice the small wrongness when it arrived. The man didn't rush. He didn't loiter either. He moved with a calm that had edges, like someone copying the way normal people moved without ever quite believing in it. Late 30s, maybe 40, summer shirt, cheap watch, hair combed neatly but not stylishly, the face of a person you wouldn't remember unless you had to. He waited until the woman in front of him finished fumbling for coupons, then stepped forward and placed his items on the belt in a deliberate sequence, each one aligned as if straightness mattered. A can of Campbell's chicken noodle, a second can, identical, a roll of clear packing tape, a small box of aluminum foil, a disposable razor pack, vitamin C tablets, generic, the kind that came in a chalky orange bottle, a single pack of batteries, cat food, not one, not two, 4 tins, all the same brand, the same flavor. Janice's eyes flicked to his hands. No ring, clean nails, the calm hands of someone who didn't do hard labor, but who also didn't sit behind a desk all day. He reached into his pocket, produced a folded scrap of paper, and placed it beside the belt with the casualness of a man setting down a receipt. It wasn't a grocery list in the way she knew lists. No milk, eggs, bread written in a hurry. No crossed-out mistakes. The handwriting was tight, controlled, almost too careful, and there were tiny indentations along the margin, pinpricks, like the paper had been pressed against something patterned. Janice scanned the first can. Beep. The man watched the register screen, but his gaze kept skipping back to the list, to her hands, to the order the items passed into the bagging area. He wasn't watching prices. He was watching process. Paper bags, he said, voice mild, and bag them in the same order. Please. It wasn't the strangest request she'd ever heard. People had quirks. But something about the way he said please made it feel less like a preference and more like a requirement that had been practiced. Janice nodded automatically, sliding the second can across the scanner. Then the tape, then the foil. The cat food tins came last, heavy and cold. Got a cat? She asked, because that was what cashiers did. Small talk to keep the belt moving. For a fraction of a second, his face paused, like a photograph caught mid-blink. Then the expression returned to normal, and he smiled with only his mouth. Not anymore, he said. Janice felt a strange little hitch in her chest that didn't match the conversation. She kept scanning. The batteries beeped. The vitamin bottle beeped. The razor pack beeped. When the total appeared, he didn't dig through a wallet. He didn't count bills with the distracted impatience of a man trying to get back to his day. He set exact cash on the counter as if he'd known the number before she said it. Then added one more request, soft, careful, like it was unimportant. Separate receipt, he said, and don't staple it. Janice's fingers hesitated above the stapler out of habit, then withdrew. She tore the receipt clean, smoothed it, and handed it over. He didn't look at it. He folded it once, slid it into his pocket without checking the total, lifted the 2 paper bags with a practiced grip, and left lane 3 as if he'd never been there at all. Janice watched him cross the front of the store toward the exit. Just before the doors, he slowed near the community bulletin board, lost pets, yard sales, church bake-off flyers, and tilted his head as though something on it had caught his interest. He stood there for 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then he walked out into the glare of the parking lot. Janice exhaled and turned back to her belt, already calling. Next, because there was always a next. But her eyes kept drifting to the spot on the counter where his list had been, to the faint pinpricks along the edge, and to that one sentence, not anymore, spoken with a steadiness that didn't sound like grief. Outside, the automatic doors sighed open and shut behind him. sealing the heat and the sunlight away like a lid. And for reasons she couldn't explain, Janice suddenly wished she had remembered his face. Janice didn't follow him. She didn't run to the glass and peer through the stripes of sunlight like a detective in a movie. She just kept working, because that was what you did when you were the person behind the register, and the line was already curling into the candy aisle. But the man's order, paper bags, same sequence, no staple, kept replaying under the beeps like a song you couldn't get out of your head. 10 minutes later, it came back. Not him. The pattern. A teenager bought a soda and left. A woman paid with loose change. Then an older man in a windbreaker stepped into lane 3 with a cart that looked almost empty, until Janice realized it wasn't empty at all. Every item was small. Every label turned forward. Every barcode facing up, as if he'd rehearsed where to place his fingers. He didn't speak while he unloaded. He just set things down in a neat row, each one spaced the same distance apart. 2 cans of soup, different brand this time. A roll of clear tape, aluminum foil, batteries, a cheap disposable razor, 4 tins of cat food. Same brand, same flavor. Janice felt a thin, cold line slide down her spine. She scanned the soup. Beep! Scanned the tape. Beep! The man watched her hands the way the first man had watched, like he cared less about groceries and more about the choreography of purchase. When she reached for a plastic bag without thinking, his voice cut in. Not rude, just precise. "Paper?" he said. 2 bags. "Keep the order." Janice's mouth went dry. She forced a small cashier's smile, the kind that didn't ask questions. "Sure," she said, and reached under the counter for paper bags. The brown ones that creased loudly when you opened them. As she bagged, she noticed his hands too. Clean nails, no ring, same quiet control. When she tried to make small talk out of reflex, busy day. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked toward the front doors, then back to her register. "Depends," he said, and it wasn't an opinion. It sounded like a calculation. He paid in exact cash. "Separate receipt?" he added. "And don't staple?" Janice's fingers hovered over the stapler again, as if her body was trying to test whether the world still worked the old way. She tore the receipt clean and slid it across to him. His hand covered it for a moment, just long enough for her to see the inside of his wrist. There was a faint pale line there, like a healed burn or a strip of skin that had been shielded from the sun for years, a mark that didn't belong to grocery shopping. He gathered the bags and left without looking at his change. Janice kept scanning for the next customer, but her attention had shifted. The store was the same. The muzak, the squeak of carts, the slap of flip-flops on linoleum, yet something underneath it felt newly arranged, as if the normal noises were now hiding a second conversation. When her lane cleared for a brief moment, she did something she'd never done before. She looked down at the receipt tape history on the register display. The 2 transactions were close enough to be back-to-back, and there it was in black and green numbers, nearly identical item counts, nearly identical totals, timed like a handoff. A laugh burst from somewhere near produce. Too loud, too sudden. Janice looked up and saw 2 men standing by the bananas. They weren't buying anything. They were watching the lanes like they were reading a scoreboard. One of them glanced at lane 3. When his eyes met Janice's, he didn't look away fast. He looked away like he'd already decided she didn't matter. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like a system. Janice swallowed, reached under the counter for a fresh roll of receipt paper, and told herself, firmly, desperately, that she was imagining it. Then the phone at the customer service desk rang once and stopped. 1 ring, a pause, and from the bulletin board near the exit, a tiny Christmas in July flyer, bright red, ridiculous in July, tilted slightly as if someone had just brushed past it. Janice kept her eyes on her register, but she couldn't stop listening. Janice didn't tell her manager. She didn't call anyone. She did the only thing a normal person could do without sounding insane. She started paying attention to what she could prove with her own eyes. Her shift dragged into the late afternoon. The light outside turning the front windows into mirrors that showed more than they should, reflections of people standing still, reflections of cars idling too long in the fire lane, reflections of faces that never looked at the shelves. Every time the door chimed, her shoulders tightened before she could stop them. The third order came at 4:17. A woman this time, early 30s, hair pinned neatly, winter coat even though it wasn't cold enough for it. She approached lane 3 with a basket, not a cart, and the basket was too light for the way she held it, as if the weight wasn't in the groceries but in the routine. She set down items one by one, each with the label facing Janice like a staged photograph. 2 packs of gum, 1 postcard rack souvenir, greetings from D.C., even though they were nowhere near it, a jar of peanut butter, a roll of film, cheap, the kind tourists bought, and then, last, a small box of matches. Janice scanned the gum. Beep. The woman's eyes never left Janice's hands. Paper, she said. Same tone. Same command, dressed as preference. 2 bags. Janice's throat tightened. She opened 2 paper bags, and the sound of the crease felt too loud, like ripping tape in a quiet room. Separate receipt, the woman added. And don't fold it. Janice nodded, her body moving on autopilot while her mind tried to keep up. A line formed behind the woman, ordinary people. Impatient, unaware. Janice could feel the pressure of their normalcy, like a weight pushing her back into pretending this was nothing. When she handed the receipt over, the woman didn't grab it. She waited until Janice's fingers let go, then lifted it carefully by the edges like it might smear. Her nail short, clean, scraped once across the printed total. Not a nervous habit, a deliberate motion, like tracing a coordinate. She slipped the receipt into her coat pocket, picked up the bags, and walked out. But she didn't leave the store. Janice saw her through the glass, standing just outside the sliding doors with her back turned, as if checking her purse or adjusting her scarf. Then the woman took 1 step to the right, just enough to be visible to the parking lot, and raised a hand to her ear like she was fixing an earring. A signal, small enough to be plausible. Across the lot, near the farthest row, a blue sedan's brake lights blinked once. Janice's stomach dropped. Not because she understood the code, because she understood the intention. Someone was confirming something happened inside lane 3, and someone else was acknowledging it. The next customer shoved a basket forward, snapping Janice back into her job. She scanned, bagged, smiled when she was supposed to. But the store had changed shape in her mind. The aisles weren't aisles anymore. They were corridors. The end caps weren't displays. They were cover. When the line finally thinned, Janice asked for her break early and walked toward the restroom without rushing, because rushing was how you told the wrong people you were scared. Halfway there, she passed the customer service desk. The phone rang again, 1 ring, then silence. The clerk didn't even look up, like she was trained to ignore it. Janice kept walking, but her eyes slid sideways to the bulletin board by the exit. The bright red flyer she'd noticed earlier, tilted, was gone now. Not replaced, just missing, leaving a pale rectangle where sun had faded the paper behind it. She reached the restroom hallway and stopped short. A man was leaning against the vending machine, hands in his pockets, not buying anything, not waiting for anyone. He looked ordinary in the way a practiced person could look ordinary. Blonde jacket, average hair, nothing memorable except his gaze was too steady. He watched her approach like he'd been expecting her to take this route. Janice slowed, heart hammering, and did the only thing she could do without making a scene. She turned casually, as if she'd forgotten something, and walked back toward the break room instead. Behind her, the vending machine man didn't follow. He only pushed off the machine, took a slow step in the same direction, and let the distance stay polite, like a leash you didn't feel until you tried to run. Janice didn't go to the break room. She pivoted at the last second and slipped into the narrow employee corridor behind the service desk, the one that smelled like mop water and cardboard dust. The one customers never saw. The fluorescent lights back there buzzed with a tired, insect-like whine, and every sound, her shoes, the distant clack of the compactor, the rattle of a shopping cart hitting tile, felt amplified, as if the building itself was listening. She forced her pace to stay normal, not fast, not hesitant, just routine. A door opened somewhere behind her, soft, controlled, then closed again. No footsteps rushing to catch up, no obvious chase. Just presence. That was the worst part. Whoever was playing this game didn't need speed. They needed pressure. Janice passed the manager's office. The blinds were half closed, the way they always were, and for a moment she considered knocking, blurting out something harmless like, "Hey, weird customer questions. Can I switch lanes?" But she couldn't get past one thought. If this was bigger than her, the first person she told might not be the first person who helped her. It might be the first person who forwarded her name. She kept moving. In the stockroom, pallets of canned goods sat like silent blocks of a city. The radio back there played soft rock low enough to be background noise for lifting and scanning. But even it felt wrong now, like sound used to flatten thought. Janice grabbed a clipboard off a hook, not because she needed it, but because holding something made her look like she belonged. She crossed toward the cardboard baler, and there, by the bin where employees tossed misprints and old signage, she saw it, a thin drift of receipts that hadn't been folded. Each one laid flat like someone had taken care to keep the paper uncreased. On 3 of them, the same telltale scrape line cut through the printed numbers, one smooth, single stroke, as if a fingernail had dragged across the exact same area on purpose. She lifted one receipt, and her cashier brain, trained on totals and line items and register IDs, noticed what her fear hadn't. The transaction codes on the bottom weren't just random noise. Store number, lane number, timestamp, a sequence that could be read like coordinates if you already knew what to look for. Something about the phrase "don't fold," it snapped into place inside her. It wasn't superstition. It was preservation. She slid the receipts under her clipboard, the paper whispering against paper, and turned slowly so she wouldn't look like she'd stolen anything. That was when the stockroom door eased open again. The vending machine man stepped halfway in, not fully committing, like he was testing whether the room belonged to him yet. His eyes went to the clipboard, to Janice's hands, to the corner of paper peeking out. He smiled in a way that didn't reach his face. "Manager back here?" he asked, voice calm, almost friendly, an excuse with no weight behind it. Janice swallowed. Her mouth was dry enough to hurt. "Up front," she said. He nodded, accepting the answer as if it didn't matter, as if the question was never the point. Then he glanced past her, toward the baler, toward the bin, toward the place she'd just touched, and she understood, with a cold certainty, that he wasn't following her out of curiosity. He was following the paper, and if she walked back onto the floor now with those receipts in her possession, she wouldn't just be a cashier finishing a shift. She'd be a loose end carrying proof. Janice pushed through the swinging stockroom door and let it flap shut behind her. Not slamming, never slamming, because a loud sound was an invitation for attention. The sales floor hit her like heat. The bright aisles, the tinny music, the chatter of families moving as if the world was still simple. She forced her face into the expression she used when customers got impatient. Neutral, slightly tired. Harmless? She angled toward the service desk first, because it gave her options. A phone, a manager, a public counter with witnesses. But before she reached it, she caught a reflection in the convex mirror above the end cap. The vending man wasn't behind her anymore. He was already ahead of her, near aisle 6, standing with his back turned, pretending to study a display of paper towels like a normal person who couldn't decide between brands. That meant he hadn't followed her out. He'd anticipated where she would go. Janice's stomach tightened. This wasn't someone improvising. This was someone running a script. She shifted left, toward the floral section, toward the front windows, toward the places where staff drifted and cameras overlapped. She kept the clipboard tucked tight against her ribs, receipts pinned beneath her thumb. Each step felt like she was carrying something that wasn't paper at all, but a live wire. At the floral counter, Marcy was misting carnations, her smock damp at the hem. Marcy glanced up. "Hey," Janice said, making her voice light. Casual. "Can you do me a favor and call Mr. Leland to the front? Just tell him I need him for a register thing?" Marcy frowned. "You okay?" "I'm fine." Janice lied. "Just something weird with a coupon." Marcy reached for the phone under the counter. Janice watched her fingers dial, watched her lips form the coded little sentence that would pull a manager without raising an alarm. Across the store, The vending man shifted his weight, still pretending to browse. He didn't look at Janice directly. He didn't have to. The mirror did that for him. Janice's eyes flicked to the front doors. A woman walked in with a stroller. A teenager followed, chewing gum. Normal, normal, normal. Then a man entered behind them. Tall, coat unbuttoned, moving like he didn't want to be remembered. He didn't grab a cart. He didn't look at the weekly deals. He paused just inside the doorway and scanned the store once. Slowly, professionally, like he was reading exits and angles. Not groceries. Janice felt a cold wash through her arms. The vending man didn't turn, but the tall man's gaze stopped, briefly, on aisle 6 on the paper towel display, then lifted toward the ceiling, toward the mirror, a signal between strangers who didn't have to speak. Janice's breath hitched. The world did something strange. It stayed loud and bright and ordinary, but a second layer slid underneath it, silent and rigid, like steel under carpet. Mr. Leland finally appeared from the back, short sleeves, tie loosened, the look of someone annoyed to be pulled into a register thing. "What is it?" he asked. Janice leaned in close enough that he could hear without her raising her voice. "I need you to look at something," she whispered, and slid the clipboard just enough for him to see the receipts. His eyes narrowed as he read the bottom lines. "What am I looking at?" Janice didn't answer right away, because answering would make it real. Instead, she watched the mirror again. The tall man had started walking. Not fast, not directly toward her, just closer, like a decision that had already been made. Leland's face didn't change much, but something in his eyes did, like a man who'd seen a scam before and realized this wasn't one of them. He slid the clipboard closer, shielding it with his forearm, and tugged Janice half a step toward the service counter so anyone watching would only see a manager doing manager things. "Go to the office," he murmured, still staring at the paper. Not fast, not slow, like you're getting change. Janice moved on instinct, turning through the employee-only door with her hands empty and her shoulders level, the way you walk when you don't want anyone to know you're running. The back hallway smelled like cardboard and bleach. The fluorescent lights buzzed with that faint, anxious electricity that made everything feel like it was being filmed. Leland followed a beat later, not directly behind her, offset, as if he'd done this before without knowing he'd done it. He shut the office door but didn't lock it. Locking meant fear. Fear meant confirmation. He sat, pulled the receipts from the clipboard, and spread them out like evidence without saying the word. Up close, the pattern wasn't just odd groceries. It was precision. Same handful of items, always in a particular order. Quantities that didn't fit the product sizes. A coupon used that shouldn't apply. A return slip stapled at the same angle. A pen mark on the back, tiny, almost invisible, like someone had touched the paper with the tip of a pencil and lifted away. Janice watched him realize it. "These aren't shopping lists," Leland said quietly. "They're instructions." Janice swallowed. For who? Leland didn't answer. He picked up the phone and dialed a number Janice had never seen anyone use. An internal hotline taped under the desk with a bland label. "Loss prevention." His voice changed when the line connected. Not louder, just flatter. "More careful. I've got a situation," he said. "Not theft. Not counterfeit. Something else. I need a call back from your field guy. Now." Janice heard the faint murmur from the other end. Then Leland gave his store ID, the cross streets, and stopped short of saying anything that would sound insane if someone else were listening. He hung up, exhaled once through his nose, then stood and cracked the blinds with 2 fingers. Janice stepped beside him, out on the floor. The tall man in the unbuttoned coat had reached customer service. He leaned in toward the teenage clerk with the patient posture of someone filing a complaint. The clerk pointed toward the back, toward the office, then, like she'd been trained, called for a manager on the intercom. And then the tall man said something that landed like a hook under Janice's ribs. He spoke Janice's name. Not loud, not angry, just certain. Janice's mouth went dry. Her name tag was a small thing, a harmless thing, and yet he had it like a key. Leland's hand tightened on the blind cord. "Stay here," he whispered. On the far end cap mirror, Janice caught the vending man again, no longer browsing paper towels, no longer pretending. He had shifted to the seasonal aisle where the red and green displays made everyone look softer, less dangerous. He stood with a candy cane box in his hands, eyes lifted toward the ceiling camera like he was checking a clock. Only he could read. Then, as if the store itself had agreed to betray her, the intercom crackled again. Manager to the front. Customer request. Leland didn't move immediately. Neither did Janice, because in that frozen second, with her own name sitting on a stranger's tongue, she understood the worst part of it. Whatever those receipts meant, whatever those shopping lists really were, the people using them weren't guessing anymore. They were confirming. Leland didn't go to the front. He did something that would have looked like cowardice to anyone who didn't understand stores. The way they were built like little worlds with their own choke points and blind corners and routines that could be weaponized. He lifted the receiver again and dialed the paging extension, not the customer service line, not the manager's intercom that everyone heard. The overhead speakers stayed silent. Instead, a faint chime sounded in the back hall, an employee-only alert, and a coded message went to the handheld radios clipped to belts. Janice caught only fragments through the wall. Doc, freeze registers. No one alone. Then the phone on the desk rang. Leland answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting his whole life for it. A man spoke in a low voice that didn't waste syllables. Janice could hear just enough to know it wasn't corporate. Tell me exactly what you saw. Leland described it with the discipline of someone reporting a fire. The receipts, the order, the repeat purchases. The man at Register 3. He didn't say spy. He didn't say KGB. He just said pattern and contact. And names? The voice on the phone went quieter. You have a camera feed. Leland looked at the small security monitor in the corner, grainy black and white views of aisles and checkout lanes. The world reduced to rectangles. He gave the man a number printed on the screen. And the girl, the voice said, Janice. She stays out of sight. Under no circumstances does she walk to her car alone. Janice felt her throat tighten at the calm certainty of it, as if the danger had already been measured and priced. Leland hung up and turned to her. For a second, he looked like he wanted to apologize for dragging her into something she hadn't agreed to. Then he didn't. Apologies were a luxury in the kind of situations where people waited outside. Listen, he said. You didn't do anything wrong. That's important. You hear me? Janice nodded, but her heartbeat didn't believe him. From the monitor, they watched the tall man in the unbuttoned coat finish his conversation at customer service. He didn't look impatient. He didn't look confused. He looked satisfied, like the store had performed the way he expected. He drifted toward the exit, and that was when the second man moved. The vending man stepped away from the seasonal aisle and followed at a distance that wouldn't register as pursuit. Not close enough to be seen as together, not far enough to be coincidence. They paused at the doors, letting families with carts pass between them, letting the automatic sensor open and close like a heartbeat. Outside, the tall man didn't walk to a parked car. He walked to a payphone mounted by the groceries' front wall, a stupid little relic that most customers ignored. He lifted the receiver, dialed a number, and spoke for less than 10 seconds. Then he hung it up and walked back inside. Janice's stomach dropped. He wasn't leaving. He was resetting. Leland's jaw hardened. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a plain brown envelope, the kind used for nightly deposits. He slid the receipts inside and sealed it with tape, pressing down hard like the paper could leak. Then he wrote one thing on the front in block letters. Date time register 3. Out on the floor, the tall man returned to the registers as if nothing had happened. He picked a new lane, register 5 this time, and placed a single item on the belt, a can of soup. Janice watched the clerk scan it. The man paid in exact change, and as the receipt printed, he did something small enough that no one else would ever notice. He touched the corner of the paper with his thumb, paused at a specific line, and let his eyes flick toward the ceiling camera, like he was checking whether the message had been received. A voice came again through the phone on the desk. Same man, same tone. They're testing you, he said, as if he could see the monitor too. They think someone in that building noticed. We're going to give them the wrong conclusion. Leland's eyes narrowed. How? Keep the store normal, the voice said. But move her. Quietly. Out the back. Janice's lungs forgot how to fill. Out the back meant the loading dock. The dark lot. The place where cameras were fewer and routines were predictable. Exactly the kind of place these people liked. Leland seemed to read her panic without looking at her. "We're not sending you into the dark," he said. "We're changing the script." He picked up his keys and opened the office door. The back hallway felt longer now, like it had stretched while they weren't watching. Leland walked with Janice toward the stockroom, not hurrying, passing stacks of canned goods and pallets of soda like they were just doing inventory. At the dock, the heavy metal door was half shut, leaving a slice of night visible. Cold air seeped in, sharp and metallic. Leland stopped Janice with a hand against her shoulder. "Wait," he whispered. Then, from outside, a car rolled slowly past the dock. No headlights, just the dim glow of dashboard illumination. It didn't stop. It didn't speed up. It moved the way a predator circles a pen. Janice held her breath until her chest hurt. And then another sound, closer and louder, the squeal of tires in the front lot, followed by the hollow slam of a door, followed by footsteps that did not belong to customers. Leland didn't look at Janice. He looked straight ahead, like a man forcing his face to stay ordinary. "Whatever this is," he said, barely moving his lips, "it's bigger than a shopping list." A shadow crossed the narrow gap under the dock door. Someone was there, not inside yet, but close enough to prove what the Cold War always proved. In the end, you didn't have to be a soldier to end up on the battlefield. Leland's radio crackled once, brief. "Coded. Controlled. Hold," a voice said. "We're in position." And Janice realized the most terrifying thing wasn't that she'd found a spy. It was that the spy network had already found her and had decided, right now, to find out what she would do next.